of a crime, but the Ohio prosecutor saying the case involving Cleveland police officer Michael Brelo not over. Timothy McGinty saying his office continuing to bring more charges in the case.
Our pursuit of justice for Timothy Russell and Melissa Williams is not over. 5 Cleveland police supervisors have been charged with dereliction of duty by the grand jury and will be prosecuted by this office for failing to control the reckless and potentially deadly police chase that ensued in this case.
Brelo shooting the couple after a wild high-speed chase in 2012. Other officers also believing the two firing shots at them. Emails released by the State Department showing Hillary Clinton's aides at the time concerned about politics, not so much about the 4 dead Americans after the terrorist attack in Benghazi. The State Department releasing the first batch of emails handpicked by Clinton. This is news on the Blaze Radio Network.
Everyone is making the switch to the Blaze to make it their source for the truth. Why not make it your source for the truth? Make theblaze.com your homepage for news that the other outlets won't even touch. Subscribe to The Blaze TV at theblaze.com/TV or on Dish Network and get access to original programming like For the Record, the show that exposes what's really going on that the government doesn't want you to know. And Real News, the daily conversation on the topics of the day that matter most. Check out the Blaze Radio Network at theblaze.com/radio with original shows like Buck Sextant, The Morning Blaze with Doc Thompson, Pat and Stu, and Jay Severin. Or if you need something to hold in your hands, subscribe to the Blaze magazine. So basically, anywhere you need to go, you can take the truth with you by taking the Blaze with you. This is the Blaze. Truth lives here. So just to recap, anywhere you need to go, you can take the truth with you by taking the Blaze with you. Find out all the ways at theblaze.com.
Republicans blasted after approving a fast-track trade bill. The Blaze Radio's Tom Peace.
Internet media mogul Matt Drudge blasting Republican leadership on Twitter after the GOP-led Senate approves enhanced trade negotiating authority for President Obama. Drudge tweeting, "Twisted D.C. electing Republicans is guarantee of more powers for Obama. Of course, none of them read secret bill." The Drudge Report founder then goes after House Speaker John Boehner, who expresses support for the bill after the Senate's passage. Calling it the night of Republican suicide, Drudge says if the GOP loses in 2016, it can be traced to the trade deception.
President Obama signing a bill he once threatens to veto, giving Congress the power of review on any nuclear deal he reaches with Iran. The Blaze Radio's Christopher Millian.
Doing a little bit of a rain dance here in the Old Pueblo. Welcome, everybody, to the Jake Feinberg Show, high above the Parisi Palace at 2919 East Broadway. Thank you so much for making us part of the program today. The doctor is in this week, checking up on patients who have been sonically altered. His synthesizers became beams of light, always light, bouncing off the electronic music in the late 60s. Playing the Tibetan Book of the Dead. My guest is a heavyweight musician. He has gotten to leave this planet with Charles Eariand and burn hot, melodic, chordal mosaics of sound in a sextant with Herbie Hancock, or Love Love with Julian Priester, or free music with Woody Shaw and Michael Howell. He came from California and the San Francisco Bay Area with different fur that paved the way for classic soundtracks like Apocalypse Now and Journeys to Enlightenment and Realization with Eddie Henderson. That fantastic journey from death to life, as my guest out cuts an electronic score. He has presence in his music, a mood as paranoid as Vietnam, or galactic, tense, neurotic, blending, getting it together with the San Francisco Express. What an honor. Dr. Patrick Gleeson, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Glad to be here.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing well.
Hey, Patrick, I wanted to ask you, did you take any classes with Luciano Berio?
No, that was before my time.
Can you talk a little bit about, I guess some of the research that I've done suggests that there's about a 200-year period from roughly 1750 to around 1950 where there was just this really empty kind of vapid time in classical music, but then this electronic music started to come along. I just would like you to talk about your perspective about how you got into electronic music.
Well, you weren't wrong, by the way, in mentioning Berio. I never had the privilege of studying with him, but I studied his music. I mean, some electronic music is very impressive without being particularly attractive. You know, Stockhausen is an example. His music is incredible, but not always or even often pleasant listening. Berio had this amazing capacity to write stuff which was so far out, and yet, you know, it was just delicious. It was like ice cream. And I've always admired that and tried to make that the case in my own music, that, you know, no matter how, from some perspective, crazy it may sound, that the ear was gratified and solaced by it. So I've already drifted off.
No, it's great. No,
what was the question?
This is fine. Now, I'm really trying to get. So it wasn't pleasant. Can you explain to the audience how it got you off, though? Because I'm with you. I mean, I think it's really important that not everything needs to be so neat and tight and sharp and trim. That there's a way for music that may not be pleasant to be enlightening. And I just want you to explain that.
Well, let's go back to how I got into this, which question you did ask. Of course, it was in the air in San Francisco at the time. This was very early 60s, and it was one of those moments. You know, everybody was there. By the time I arrived out at Mills College, Terry Riley had performed there. I performed on the same stage, different piece, same stage with John Cage. I talked with John, did some work with Steve Reich, who's still a man whose music I admire very much, and performed with Terry Riley on Bruce Conner's movie, Crossroads. So all this was possible because at the same time I was doing this, I was also doing overdubs for the Jefferson Starship, you know. Yeah, and doing stuff for David Rubinson, who was a well-known and very creative producer that worked with the Chambers Brothers and Patti LaBelle, whom I later worked with, and all these different musics were coming together, and really, Jake, no one cared that was involved in that, whether you were, quote, classical musician or electronic musician or a rock musician. Jazz musicians, I will say, still have and even then had a little attitude about some rock music, but not all jazz musicians felt that way, and they didn't feel that way about all rock music. But pretty much everybody was in the same boat together. I think what got me particularly interested in electronic music began with some musique concrète recordings that were on Folkways, I think it was. Musique concrète is basically you take a tape recorder, you go out and record your stuff, come back to your studio, you have a few simple tools, filters, amplifiers, and most valuably a razor blade so you can splice all this stuff together, and you make something that approximates music out of these natural sounds. And that was the first music I made in that era was a form of musique concrète, and I performed it out of San Francisco State. And then also at one of the rock concerts with Kenneth Anger.
This is fantastic. But I guess getting more to the crux of it, for instance, this music that you put together, like, was there a lot of community support? I mean, the university clearly supported it. I guess what I'm getting at is that I look back in our society, and I say that music was treated, or musicians were treated, it was treated as a profession and not an art. Today, it's more, the vibe is more, you got to pay to play, or somehow it's just background music. The value has changed, and you said like it was just happening at that time, but was there infrastructure? Was there? I mean, I know about the Bill Grahams, but I mean, universities were letting you get off on this stuff. So I mean, was there? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I'm laughing, Jake, because it was really a matter of the inmates had taken over the asylum.
That's exactly what I'm saying. This is it. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and so, for example, the difference between now and then, I'll tell you something that's just so dramatic. Okay, after, being a professional musician for, I don't know, 50 years, I am writing letters and making proposals in order to have the opportunity to do an installation at the San Francisco Museum of Art in association with some of Bruce Conner's tapestries. Now, the reason that I bring this up is that in 1967, with not a credential in the world, nothing written, nothing to show for it, as one of Bill Graham's lieutenants said to me disparagingly when I presumed to say that I wanted to appear on a bill with one of the rock groups, he said, "You got no fucking product."
Hey, Patrick, I'm loving it. Just, we're on live air. Be careful with the cursing. I know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Don't worry. Just go ahead. Continue.
Hopefully the accent made it in
just be careful. It's all right.
So I had nothing to show for it. I marched down to the San Francisco Museum of Art. I didn't even know who the director was, and his name was Hopkins, as it turned out. And I said I wanted to talk to whoever was in charge. Well, this little man came out dressed in a dark suit and tie and white shirt, and he introduced himself as the director of the museum, and I said, I want to put a show on down here. Oh? Well, what kind of show? Well, it's going to be a kind of a happening. And I described this performance that involved a rock group, myself, Bruce Conner, Ben Van Meter, a nude dancer. I mean, just crazy stuff. And he said, well, we'll have to look at the schedule. I mean, that was it.
Let's look at the schedule. It doesn't. Yeah. It was so out. It was so out. It was so avant-garde. And let's look at the schedule. I mean, it's just beautiful.
So that was all it took, And so within, I think, in an hour, I was scheduled to perform these pieces that I had constructed at the San Francisco Museum of Art. No credentials, no reason for anybody to say yes. 50 years later, I have been writing letters back and forth to the San Francisco Museum of Art's director of moving image and animation for 6 months. He even came down here with an assistant, and we talked over what the proposal might be, and then I had to put the proposal on writing. I mean, we are in an age of artistic arteriosclerosis. We just can't get anything moving.
Okay, so please, that's important. Break that down. We're at a stagnant point. I mean, it's just an onerous type of thing just to get anything done? I need you to talk about this.
Yeah, well, first of all, there's no government funding to speak of, certainly not in comparison to the 60s. I mean, in the 60s, I had grants from both, the 70s, I should say, I had grants from both the California Arts Council, which underwrote the composition of the first pieces I wrote for the Kronos Quartet. I had a grant from the National arts foundation for jazz composition. I mean, that stuff just doesn't exist anymore. I mean, the guys that are coming up now that are the age I was then, it's a much, much tougher road to hoe. And as you say, now we're in an era of pay-to-play. And it's, as you probably know, it's very common, certainly in Los Angeles, but I'm sure all over the country. If an unknown guy wants to come in and play at a small club, he has to pay the owners a guarantee for the door. It's usually a guarantee that's going to be larger than the door can possibly bring in. So essentially, you're paying to play. Very tough. Very tough.
This is talking to Dr. Patrick Gleeson here. I want to ask you. Okay, so you came originally with this proposition, nude dancer, rock, a whole amalgamation of things.
Yeah, it was a happening.
It was a happening, right? It was
happening.
It was right. It was just everything, and I also want you to. So yeah, you've been meeting with this art now. Fast forward to present day, you've been meeting with this director and an assistant. But can you also talk about the streamlining, the homogenization, the lack of I mean, do you feel like you can even go outside the lines the way you used to, or have we become more? You used sclerosis before, but
yeah.
I guess I'm just
I go out. I've been outside the lines since I first got interested in music, so it's too late to come back in now. And I find that if you're lucky enough, and I'm saying luck, I'm not saying talent, because I think a lot of what happens to us in music is luck. Mm-hmm. That if you're lucky enough to get started in an area where there's a lot of scope for doing what you want to do, people will tend to let you keep doing that. I'm going to put on a show at the end of July at the Ace Theater here in Los Angeles. The dates aren't set yet, but basically I'm going to show many of the underground films that I scored for beginning in the 60s, and then at the end of the evening I'm performing a new piece, it's a score accompanying a new film, and I'm going to perform it live. So, I mean, that's kind of a weird and crazy thing to do, but nobody thought it was strange for me to do it because it's the kind of thing I have been doing. So, okay, that's fine. In fact, the Los Angeles Film Forum is sponsoring it. So I got a buy because I have been given a buy previously, if that makes any sense. When you're getting started, though, now, I think it's very difficult.
I think you're all, yeah, exactly. I mean, you said as a non-entity and no credibility, and you set it up, that happening, and nowadays you're living off that reputation, which is great.
Exactly.
And you guys are all doing that, and more power to you. But what I'm looking for, what I'm saying is, it's disheartening. I'm a journalist, man. I don't play music. I just look at it and I say, how the heck are younger cats supposed to? Because if you don't have the degree, if you don't have the resume, you're not. That's the bothersome part. Everything was so organic back at that time. And going back to that time, for instance, did you cross paths with Tom Constantin and Phil Lesh at all at Mills College?
Well, I knew Phil very slightly, and Tom I just knew by reputation. The only one of the Dead that I really got to know was the drummer, Mickey.
Oh, Mickey. How did you get to?
Yeah.
How did you know Mickey?
Pardon?
How did you get to know him?
Well, Francis hired him as the percussionist, the quote ethnic percussionist for a lot of the sounds in Apocalypse Now, and I was the head of the music team. I was the head. Francis anointed me master synthesis.
That's right.
And really ticking off the other guys on the team. What do you mean master? What does that make me? Anyway, I was the head of the team, and much of the music for Apocalypse Now was recorded at my studio at Different Fur. So Mickey came in, and in fact he and I were trading off sessions. He would basically work 12 hours in the studio, or maybe 10, and then I would work 10, and then we'd have the maintenance guys come in and get everything back up snuff again and begin the next day. So I got to know Mickey a little bit through that. He was there for a long time. I think Mickey was there maybe 6 weeks or something like that.
I want to ask you a question because we're going to go into it later, but okay. So I've interviewed. It's funny. I found right after we booked the interview, I found a vinyl copy of Apocalypse Now, and there's like all this credits, and it's there's like maybe 4 or 5 guys that were playing keyboard synthesizers, but it just says at the top, Master Synthesizer, Dr. Patrick Gleeson, like you were the one at the top. But I've interviewed Gregorico, who did work on that, and they said that some of the stuff was done at the Dead Studio, but was it all done at Different Fur?
No. And I didn't mean to say that. I said a lot of it was done there.
Mm-hmm, okay.
I mean, we worked, but not all, certainly. We worked, basically, as I said, we worked a 24-hour shift, including the maintenance. Analog equipment took a lot of maintenance. So we worked 24 hours a day for, I don't know, I hesitate to say, but I think we worked for 6 months. Was it that long? I can't remember. It was a very long time. However, while that was going on, there was, I didn't even know that the Dead did any work outside of the work that Mickey did at Different Fur until you just told me. But there was also 2 guys working down at David Rubenson's studio at the Automat, and then 1 guy working in the basement. When I say basement, it was the world's most glorious basement, in the little basement studio that was at the bottom of Francis, the little building called the Flatiron Building that Francis owned on Broadway. I mean, such a beautiful little studio. His head set designer designed the interior, and the carpets were woven to specification for that studio.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was gorgeous.
Did Coppola come and hang with you at Different
Yes,
Fur?
he did. Yeah, looking back on it over the years, I have to say that I have mixed feelings about how I responded to that, and I'll tell you what it was and why. Francis took a liking to the studio, to the ambience. It was really a wonderful place to be for a musician, Different Fur. And he used to like to come and crash on my couch up in my apartment on the 3rd floor.
Right.
And he would come down and just hang, and he really wanted to get involved. I mean, one day when David was there, he even said to David, he said, I think I'd like to mix the music here. Well, I mean, David's a businessman too, and so am I. I had to step in and say, I really got my hands full just making this music for the film, and I think David's got more studios at the Automat, and probably that's the best place to mix. David just had a stone face throughout this. He didn't express relief or gratitude or anything. I think if I had jumped in and said I wanted to mix the thing there would have been a problem. Now, the other thing I was going to say about the relationship between me and Francis is that at one point Francis said, you know what? I think you and I ought to start an electronic music studio just for film. Now, most people, I suppose, just for no other reason than the money that could be involved, would have jumped at that. I said, I'm really loving working with you, man, but that's not what I want to do. And he said, oh, that's cool. He said, everybody's got to do their own thing, and he never brought it up again. But and years later, I thought, well, why was it the right thing for me to say that?
Well,
it just seemed as if Francis was such a powerful personality, and he kind of engulfed, in a good way, but he kind of engulfed everybody that was close to him. And I just had my own little musical direction that I needed to pursue, and I thought that's going to be too many detours and mixed priorities and so forth and so on. Better just to let it go. So I did.
Yeah, I think that it's fascinating. You can look back in hindsight I do think it's part of your generation. I think there were a lot of people that were looking for their own true voice, and instead of dollar signs, I mean, we just had such an explosive growth. Like if someone came to you today, it's a no-brainer. There's just so much. I mean, it's just so much money. But I don't think that was your end goal. Your end goal.
No.
Your end goal was to. I mean, all I know is that Herbie Hancock, when he joined when the Headhunters, the original Headhunters album was made at Different Fur, and when he started to tour at that time, he was dead broke. I mean, the point is that I mean, I know why you answered, because that's who you are. I mean, that's that you were talking about you were being honest to yourself. And that's kind of where we're at today, where people would just jump at it because of the dollar signs, regardless of whether good music was made, bad music didn't matter. So, you know what's interesting, though?
You got to give everybody a break on that, because it's just so much tougher to make a living. You can understand why the responses are different. You know, I mean, if somebody says to you, "Gee, I'll be happy to give you $100 to walk from here to the corner."
Yeah.
You know, if you're a guy on the street, you're going to say yes. If you're
That's good.
P. Diddy, you're going to say, what are you talking about, man? I don't have time for that. So in an era of affluence, people will make more individual choices, not based on money, because they got enough. And I did too. I never really, once Different Fur got underway and I started doing sessions, and I also did ads at the beginning, and which were paid very well, and the music for ads, and I just never had a struggle. So I don't want to give myself too much credit for making these high-minded decisions that I can afford.
You're doing a fantastic job of reinterpreting what I'm. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. I mean, this you know, just to put a button on this, I'm going to send you some of these clips, because you said that you would come in 10-hour days. Mickey would come in 10-hour days. Was Mickey there sometimes overnight? At times, would that work out like that?
I don't even know. And
no, the reason I bring it up
and
is
I'll tell you, the whole thing with Mickey was funny, because not to go into the details of Mickey's day, but there would be days when there would be a lot of excitement and enthusiasm that would just keep right on going.
No, because
and so would the sessions. At first, I'd send in a second and say, you know, remind Mickey that his time expired 40 minutes ago.
No, because
once we're into 2 hours, I got the studio manager coming in and holding the door open and keeping it open and saying, "We're ready for the next session, Mickey." And finally, that would probably get it. But often it would be, "I got just one more thing to do."
Wow. Yeah, that's a little bit onerous. I've you know, it's just so funny, because those guys that I've talked to about this session, they talked about Coppola crashing out on a couch, and that was the couch in Different Fur. And they'd wake up in the morning, there'd be percussion. It's a wild scene. Anyway, we digress here with Dr. Patrick Gleeson. We have a game on this program called Name That Tune. We're going to put this in, and then we'll come back and break it down. Okay?
Okay.
Doctor? What do you got for us, brother?
I don't know, although it's a perfect illustration of what Herbie often talked about, is music is all a matter of tension and release.
That's right.
Yeah, that's about as far as I get.
Well, that was one of your buddies, Eddie Henderson, album called Realization, and the name of that tune was called Anua. And
Oh yeah.
And,
yeah, I produced it. I should remember it.
Well, no, I mean, I want, this is important because, you know, in my evolution of being a listener, when I first acquired this album, and forgive me, I don't remember the label, Capricorn maybe?
Capricorn, yeah.
You know, I could not get my ears around it because of the tension and release, and now I listen to it after, and this was probably 6-7 years ago, and now I listen to it, and it's like, yeah, I get it. I hear it. I hear the, you know, Billy Hart building, come like that. And most importantly, I hear you finding a way to get your voice into all those instruments. And the question I have, I'll let you go off in a minute, but I just, did you guys do that all together live?
Pretty much, I think, as I recall. After Crossings, which was the first album of Herbie's I played on, everything else was done live. So, you know, the realization was really pretty much the Herbie Hancock septet. And I think we just hit.
Did you went on tour with them as well? Is that right?
With Herbie, yeah. For a little under 2 years.
And was that with the Buster Williams, Billy Hart?
Yep.
Okay. Could you talk from your perspective? I think one of the biggest things today, you hear someone talk about, you know, developing artists, and I think about a single artist who might wind up with different types of accompaniments. And back when you were coming up, it was really about bands, and one of the bands was Mwadishi, being able to stay together and then becoming very tight. And I've talked to Billy Hart and Eddie Henderson, and they were reading the same spiritual text on the road, and it became, you know, just you guys were reading each other's minds. And I was just hoping you could talk a little bit about your experience. Number one, the spiritual quality of music and how that band fueled that, and then also how rigorous it was to get your rig around.
Yeah, right. Well, let's start with the good news. The understanding, and of course, remember, I was the new boy. I came in last. I also came in the first white guy in the band at a time when everybody else had Swahili names. It was like, you know, the Black Power early 70s. And so I was an outlier in that I was the last guy in. The other guys had been playing together for a while when I arrived. I was a white guy, which made a difference at first.
How?
Well, there was a certain amount of distrust. The guys in the band felt some way or other I was this ringer, which their white producer, David Rubinson, had foisted off on Herbie as a commercial ploy. The irony of that was that David began to feel that it would surely be nice if I would just play a little more commercially.
That theory went out the window. Yeah.
But
that's great.
Anyway,
that's great.
So that was, and that distrust lasted. I think for two of the guys, it's a little tiny tributary of a stream of togetherness, but there's still a little difference. For two of the guys in the band, I'm not going to say which two, doesn't matter.
Sure.
One has his whole life has been devoted very much to Afrocentric way of looking at life and of understanding life, and the other guy and I just got into beef on the road over a professional matter of music, and he felt that, you know, I felt he hadn't supported me, and he felt that I had abandoned him, and those bad feelings have lasted, not as a big deal, but just as a little undercurrent. So to some little extent, that difference, white-black, kind of made its way forward even into the 21st century, but in large part it disappeared in about 3 or 4 months, I would say. It didn't take long. By the time we were doing Eddie Henderson's first album, I remember the guys, this was a band that, boy, the guys in this band were funny, man. I mean, Buster Williams could have been a Richard Pryor. I'm not kidding you. He was hilarious.
Really?
Oh,
I've interviewed
so
Buster.
funny.
I can't believe you. I love that. Okay, continue.
Yeah, he was a very different guy then. I mean, now he's sweet and kind and spiritual and really so loving. In those days, he was angry, funny, acerbic, disdainful. I mean, it could put you down. I mean, they say a guy whose knife cuts so sharp that your head falls off before you know you've been hit.
Wow.
I mean, he was like that. But anyway, so the guys are out in the studio, and I'm doing some engineering at the moment, and the guys are standing around telling jokes, and I'm hearing it on the playback speakers. So I'm laughing about all this, and Jabali comes in, Billy Hart comes in, come back from the bathroom, and he looked at me, and Billy's also another very funny guy, and he said, "What in the world do you think you're laughing at, man?" I looked up at him, and he said, "You don't get it, do you? You're into this," I won't use the word stuff, I'll call it. "You're into this stuff deeper than any of us." And I realized, he's right. And another thing that happened I thought was very interesting about that kind of acceptance was that after we'd been on the road for a few months, I suddenly began hearing all this kind of casual, disparaging talk about white people behaving badly. Which God knows there's plenty of occasion for in this country, particularly if you're a black man.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, I'd hear that honky sucker, stuff like that. And I thought, God, I mean, what's going on here? They don't like me anymore, or they're mad at me, or why am I listening to all this? And then I got it. Oh, because I'm one of them. I'm not the white guy in the band. I'm one of the guys in the band.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole thing just disappeared, which was a wonderful kind of
Wow.
of acceptance.
This is, I'm sorry, man, but you just laid it down, man. You really have, being not being alive at that time, I think you just about nailed what I mean, from your perspective. I don't know how I would react like that, but yeah, you felt like you're in that band. You're not that on that out. I guess my question, I realized Herbie was a great leader because he was pretty, well, actually, I don't know. I've never interviewed Herbie, but why wouldn't he sort of, he didn't feel like he needed to advocate for you with these other people?
Completely not Herbie's style. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Herbie is a, I'm trying to pick these words very carefully because he deserves care. Mm-hmm. He's affable, amused, responsive, listens so carefully. I mean, this is, I think, if there's one thing in the world that makes Herbie the musician he is, it's how well he listens. And he listens to everybody that way. But he doesn't tell anybody what to do. It's just not his style. And I was thinking about our having this conversation earlier in the morning, and I had this little fantasy that you would ask me if as people sometimes do, if it wasn't true that I had taught Herbie about the synthesizer, and I was thinking about what the best response to that was, and which was no, I never taught Herbie anything, and Herbie never taught me anything. We learned a lot from each other, but you learned by listening. Just listening to the music and understanding what was going on in the music as microscopically as possible. And if you did, you didn't need any instructions. So I would say in the counting the albums in the 2.5 years I was with Herbie, I would guess he might have given me 5 single sentences of anything that could be construed as instruction.
Wow.
Yeah. and
I like also how you're fantasizing about what questions I'm going to ask you, which, I mean, the truth is that, continue. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, it's just, to me, it's what's confounding is how, I don't mean that you have to be a micromanager, but he's just, I can't imagine that. I guess he brought in, I mean, he's just surrounded himself in that band and otherwise with people that he didn't need to correct that. But he didn't need to teach them anything. They just they were all listening when you guys, when you would bring it up and, tension, high, everybody got it and would go, and then they'd bring it back down. But even within the, just the sparring that would, I sort of already know who you're talking about in that band. There's a couple of one in particular, the very prickly cat. The question I was fantasizing about last night was, okay, you look at Patrick Gleason's, it starts in 1965 at the San Francisco Tape Archive, and then immediately it goes, he worked with Herbie Hancock. Well, there's what was Dr. Patrick Gleeson doing in the late 60s? Did you have a trio of some sort? Because different.
No.
Yeah.
I
want to know your
the
first
very
band.
first night I ever played live on the bandstand anywhere in the world was with Herbie Hancock and the Mwandishi band.
Oh my!
With Miles Davis and Gil Evans in the audience.
What venue was it?
What's the name of that little basement place that's so famous in the Village? I can't even think of the name of it now. You go down the stairs. Max owned it.
Not the Vanguard.
Vanguard.
No, the Village Vanguard. You played with Mwandishi in the Village Vanguard with Gil Evans and Miles Davis in the audience.
Not only that.
Oh, that is
Gil
classic.
came and brought his little cassette recorder, and then invited me to come over to his apartment. He had an apartment in West Beth, which was a housing unit that was reserved only for artists. A great place to live. And we sat and we had dinner one night, and we had glasses of water and listened for a couple of hours in the afternoon. I think pretty much every day that week. And again, Gil was another one where you didn't get instruction, you got enlightenment. I remember at one point we were sitting there and I was listening and I was just not happy with what I was hearing about myself at that time, and Gil could tell that, so he stopped the recorder and he said, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, I sound like I don't know what to play." Gil said, "Yeah." He said, "That happens to me too." He said, "I don't know. Usually when that happens, I just put my hands in my lap and listen to the guys for a while. And I guess what happens when I do that is I find that I'm playing again."
Interesting. That is, I'm still trying to figure out how you fit. Can you talk about the rig that you had and how you fit that into that Vanguard stage is not very big. I don't know.
I spent not only in Herbie's band but a couple of other bands. I mean, in the 70s, I was playing on a postage stamp. I mean, we had I can't remember which club it was. There was one club we played several times. Might even have been the Jazz Workshop in Boston, that the stage was so small that the only way they could fit me on the stage was to put a table extending off the stage for my chair to be on. So my rig was on the stage, but I was sitting on a table next to the stage.
I love it. I mean, this is what happened to this America. This is the America that I want. I mean, I don't need, it doesn't have to look right. It's just the sound is, and that's, can you, so wait, let's just go back for a minute. You're telling me that you never played anything, you played any music in the late 60s in Different Fur when you first opened that studio? You collaborated with nobody.
Well, I did studio work. Let me just jump back for a minute and say I took piano as a child from the age of 6 until I think I must have been about 15. I told my parents I didn't want to study classical anymore. I wanted to study jazz, and they said, well, only if you get permission from your classical piano teacher, who of course said no. At that point I quit music. But I'd had 6 to 15. I had 9 years of piano, so I had some background in music. And then I had an incredible love for jazz, which hit me, like getting hit by a truck. I mean, when I was in about the 5th grade, and by the time I was in the 8th grade, my best buddy and I, Jeff Pascoe, were actually going down and getting into the I can't remember whether they were called race clubs or what they call them, just after hours, but it was understood it would be black music. But this was in Seattle, and the places wouldn't even open until midnight. And of course, no minors were supposed to. Nobody was supposed to be there. It was all illegal for that matter. But we'd stand outside, and when the coast was clear, the guy at the door would take our dollar and let us in. And sometimes he'd say something like, I don't want to see you people drinking in there and all.
Right.
So, but we would get to go in, and we would see, incredible musicians. So we were, and then of course the Palomar was a big deal at that time, and we would go see all the big acts there, Count Basie and Louis Armstrong and so forth. But it was just a lot of music in Seattle, and that became part of my background. And of course there were records, and I fell completely in love with every single member of the Benny Goodman Sextet, and had all their records and Art Tatum's records. So I was getting a lot of jazz background by osmosis, but I never had an opportunity to play jazz except just to improvise by myself. I never played with anybody else in a group, and never played live with anybody, even when I was actually being a professional musician. I was until I went out with Herbie, and before then I only did studio work.
This is interesting because I wanted to ask you who you were most influenced by from the piano side early on that you got to see up in Seattle.
Well, there were a lot of good musicians around at that time. Ernestine Anderson was up there.
She's a singer.
I'm trying to remember the name of the man that accompanied her often. He was a wonderful pianist. Sounded a little bit like Errol Garner.
Was David Friesen up there?
I think maybe that was a little later, but I'm trying to think.
There was a club called the Longolin that his buddy. There was a piano. I can't remember his name, but there was. Hey, continue. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is like all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, here Patrick Gleeson, ARP synth, or leaving this planet, ARP synth. But I'm like, well, that there was stuff that came before that, pianos, Fender Rhodes, organs, and I'm like, I just, that's what I was fantasizing about, is that Gleeson was laying on a B3 somewhere, And,
No, and I don't really feel. Denny Zeitler and I were talking. We did a little project together, which came out last year. Wow. A record of his. Wow. And when we were making it, he said to me, I remember what it was. A fan of Denny's came up. He was also performing live down here. And so Denny introduced me, and the woman said, she said, oh, wonderful, two incredible keyboardists together. Or maybe she said piano players. And Denny and I looked at one another, and we both turned to her and said, well, really, Denny is a piano player. I'm not exactly a piano player.
That's right.
And I have different. I didn't say that to her, but I have different chops. And I've never really interested myself beyond the first 9 years when I took piano and I was, playing Rachmaninoff and that kind of stuff. I've never really interested myself in the technical aspects of becoming a good piano player. I mean, there were other fish that I wanted to fry and have fried, and
can you for the audience, can you talk about what your chops are and how they differentiate from a pianist?
Well, I know an awful lot about the physical structure of sound. I mean, all good musicians know a lot about it. I know even a lot more than that. And it gets into physics.
And I never even got to physics in high school, but I know you know that, so
yeah,
that's awesome.
Okay, and that is the beginning of my understanding of how to create sound. It begins with the physics of sound. I mean, of course, in the actual process, I don't sit down and say E equals MC squared or anything. I mean, I perform like any other musician, reaching for what I like. But underlying that liking and underlying that reaching for something is a lot of knowledge that I've acquired over the years. And as I say, part of it is just physics, the physics of music. I've done a lot of reading in those areas. I even I started to write a book in that area and discovered that to get the book published, even Oxford University Press wanted me to lighten up, and I thought, no, that's really not what I want to do, so I'll just drop the project. But I know a lot about that stuff, and then I know a lot about a lot of different synthesizers and different synthesis methods. So I know the principles behind a lot of different synthesis methods. Now, I think part of what I know is what all arrangers know. How to distribute a chord along a harmonic line and that sort of thing.
I want to put in a piece of music here again, and we'll come back and talk about it.
Sure.
Dolong Bridge was the last army outpost on the Nung River.
Well, I guess you're going to be able to get that one pretty well.
I guess so. Yeah. Yeah.
No, but here's my question, because Doctor, I knew we're going to need probably 9 hours, but I want to ask you: was part of your ingenuity or ingenious quality was that you started to you made other sounds from your synthesizer, like a helicopter, right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I have. In fact, I spoke earlier about this performance down at the Ace Hotel Theater in July in Los Angeles. Of the films that we're playing, several are by Bruce Conner, and in one of them, I begin by constructing an entire woodland scene. It doesn't sound musical at all. It becomes musical, but you just think you're out in the woods and you're listening to a light flying by and birds chirping and the wind in the trees and a little brook running and so forth. And I've done that sort of thing in various ways, not just with natural sounds, but with other sounds. I did one whole film of Bruce's where it was a very strange little film called Television Assassination, which he had shot the assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald with an 8mm camera of the television footage. Well, of course, the two are non-synchronized, right?
Right.
And so they roll. So I thought, well, the rolling is worthy of audio explication. And then the film had been through the usual stuff that happens to underground films. I mean, it had started out as 8mm, then been transferred to 16 and been flatbedded and gone through dirty gates, and there was all this weird crap that would fly in and out of the frame. So I thought, well, that's to be orchestrated as well. So that whole film was a sonic explanation or explication of all the little anomalies and, quote, problems and artifacts on the screen. And I really get off on that stuff. I think it has a good, this is overstating the case, but it has a moral purpose in a way, in that it reminds me, and as I'm doing it, and it reminds people as they're listening to it, that, you know, all sound is the same. Music is sound. Every sound that you hear is musical. It's all, these are you know, various complicated accumulations of sine waves that are massaging our brains. And if we listen to these sounds in that way, it's kind of like what the Buddhists say when they talk about mindfulness. You know, you just pay attention to the present, pay attention to the sounds that you're listening, that you're hearing right now, and really hear them, and you discover there's a lot going on, and it's very interesting, and it's a form of music.
In about a minute, Doctor, can you just talk about, you have this performance coming up. What else is on tap for you in the next few months?
Well, I'm going to do this single performance, and then I want to get together a very small group. I mean, I can't afford to be large. Mm-hmm. So it'd probably be a musician who has some interest in world music and in jazz, and who can play, you know, more than one stringed instrument, and the equivalent in a percussionist drummer. And make a trio, if you will, and the music that I'm performing live down at the Ace is sort of the beginning of that direction in my music. It's a little bit, I don't know if you've ever heard an album of mine called Slide, but it's a little bit like the music on that album. It's carrying that forward a little bit. It's probably a little bit more intense than that music. But I'd like to perform that live. I don't know what the venues will be. It could be, there'd be art galleries and that sort of thing, or it might be clubs. I don't know. Well,
listen, I want to do part two as soon as possible. This was I had such a great time, man, and so much great content. Big difference between content and great content, and a lot of great content today, brother. So I hope you had a good time, and we'll do it again. Okay?
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
All right, man. All right, we'll be back in just a minute.